Tonight we are going to Pittsburgh in the mid-1990s for a true story that is equal parts calm, strange, and quietly unbelievable. It involves two banks, steady security cameras, and a man named McArthur Wheeler who sincerely believed he had discovered the ultimate disguise. His disguise was lemon juice, not as a snack, not in tea, on his face. And yes, the cameras still saw him, very clearly. So if you like bedtime true crime with soft tension, dry sarcasm, and a story that feels like a cautionary tale written by reality itself, settle in. Keep the lights low, breathe slow. This is the bank robber who kept forgetting his mask. Chapter 1. Pittsburgh on a normal Friday. Pittsburgh in the mid-1990s could look like a city that had finally decided to exhale. The steel legend was still in the bricks and bridges, but the mood was more practical than dramatic. People went to work, complained about traffic like it was a civic sport, and made plans for dinner as if dinner could solve anything. The rivers did their steady work of dividing and connecting neighborhoods, and the skyline did its steady work of pretending it was not watching you. On a normal Friday, the city moved with a familiar rhythm. In the morning, the streets carried commuters who already knew which lane would betray them. At lunch, the sidewalks filled with office workers who had mastered the art of walking quickly while holding a cup of coffee that was definitely too hot. In the afternoon, the light shifted across the bridges like a slow scene change in a play that never truly ended. And inside banks, the lighting remained the same bright, neutral glow, the kind that makes every surface look clean and every person look mildly tired. Banks were calm places on purpose. They were designed to feel like reality was under control. The counters were the same height everywhere, the pens were always attached to chains, and the lines had those little ropes that suggested patience was a shared community value. Behind that calm were cameras that did not care about anyone's mood, cameras that were always on, cameras that were politely watching from corners, ceilings, and above the doors, recording with the steady attention of a houseplant that never forgets. People did not always think about the cameras. People said they did. People nodded solemnly and said, yes, of course there are cameras. But the way most people lived suggested that cameras were theoretical, like earthquakes, like the idea that someone somewhere might actually read the terms and conditions. Cameras were a fact of life, but a fact that stayed in the background until it did not. In that setting, on that kind of Friday energy, you could meet a man like McArthur Wheeler and not notice anything special. He did not enter the day wearing a neon sign that said soon to be a headline. He was not famous. He was not a public figure. He was not a carefully curated villain in a movie. He was a person in a city, walking around with thoughts in his head like everyone else. The difference was not his appearance. The difference was his plan. The difference was his confidence in that plan. And the difference was the strange way his confidence did not require evidence, only enthusiasm. McArthur Wheeler was not the kind of name you forget quickly, but it is also not a name you would assume belongs to someone who is about to make history in the most unnecessary way possible. If you met him in a grocery store, you might guess he was the type to have strong opinions about parking spaces. If you met him at a bus stop, you might assume he was waiting for a ride and thinking about nothing at all. If you met him at a bank, you might assume he was there to handle regular life errands. And in a sense he was. He had decided to handle an errand. It just happened to be an errand that would put him on television. It is easy to imagine that a dramatic event begins with dramatic music. In real life, it often begins with someone sitting somewhere ordinary, listening to someone else talk, and deciding, yes, that sounds about right. In this story, the someone else is Clifton Earl Johnson, another real person, another piece of the puzzle, another man who did not set out to become a cultural reference point, but who somehow ended up playing a supporting role in Nen. Clifton Earl Johnson had the kind of name that sounds like it should belong to a man with a toolbox and a calm voice. He was not a narrator, but he did influence the narration of events. He was one of those people who can speak with confidence even when the topic is not fully understood. This is not a unique talent, it is a common talent. It just becomes more visible when the result is a news story. Somewhere in the background of this Friday, there was a conversation about banks, money, and the way the world works. People have those conversations all the time. They happen in cars, living rooms, parking lots, and anywhere two people share the same boredom. Most of the time, those conversations stay where they started. They do not grow legs and run into a bank. But sometimes, in the presence of the wrong combination of confidence and confusion, a conversation can become a plan. The plan that arrived in McArthur Wheeler's life was not a sophisticated plan. It was not even a complicated plan. In fact, it was a plan that could fit in a single sentence and still have room left over for regret. The plan was to use lemon juice as a kind of invisibility aid. This is the part where your brain may try to protect you by assuming you misheard. That is very kind of your brain. Your brain is trying to keep your world stable. Lemon juice in normal life is something you put in tea or on fish. It is something you add to recipes when you want freshness. It is not something you add to your face when you want to hide from surveillance cameras. But this story is not about normal life. This story is about what happens when a person confuses a science fact with a personal protection system. There is a real concept behind the lemon juice idea. Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. If you write with it on paper, the writing can remain hard to see until heat reveals it. That is a thing. That is true. But the leap from invisible ink to invisible face is not a leap, it is a vault. And yet, to McArthur Wheeler, it felt like a logical step. Not logical in the way that logic works, but logical in the way that wishful thinking works. It is important to remember the mood of the time. People were surrounded by myths and half-facts. Television and movies offered a steady stream of stories where clever tricks always worked. A character would do something simple, and the world would respond as if the character had hacked reality. The audience would accept it because it was entertaining. The problem occurs when someone accepts it because it is practical. In the city, the banks did their quiet routines. Employees arrived, turned on lights, opened drawers, counted cash, and reminded themselves to smile even when their feet hurt. Customers came in with their deposit slips and their small questions. Some customers were in a hurry, some were lonely and wanted to talk. The bank was not just a place where money moved, it was a place where people showed up to feel organized for 5 minutes. Meanwhile, McArthur Wheeler was not preparing like a person who expects reality to push back. He was preparing like a person who expects reality to nod and step aside. This is a risky way to live even when you are choosing paint colors. When you apply it to a serious and illegal plan, the risk becomes less like a gamble and more like a guarantee. He did not see himself as a person doing something foolish. In his mind, he was doing something smart. He believed he had found a loophole. He believed he had discovered a trick that the system had not considered. In his head, he was not reckless. He was innovative. This is a common misread in human history. It has launched many bad projects. The calm tension of this story is that everyone else is living in a world where cameras exist, and McArthur Wheeler is living in a world where lemon juice is a cloak. These worlds are about to meet. One of them will win. It will not be the lemon juice. Before we move forward, it helps to picture the kind of confidence that does not come from learning. It comes from certainty. It comes from the feeling that you have cracked a code, even if you have not checked whether the code was real. It is the kind of confidence that makes a person walk straight into bright lights and think they are in shadow. On that Friday, as Pittsburgh went about its business, no one needed to know his name. No one needed to anticipate the story that would follow. The city was not holding its breath. The bridges did not shake with foreshadowing. The rivers did not change direction to warn anyone. It was just a normal day, and that is the most unsettling part, because it means the absurd can arrive without announcement. And now, with the stage set, we step toward the first strange decision that turns a normal Friday into a tale told for decades. Chapter 2: The Lemon Juice Lab. Every story like this has a moment where you want to reach through time and gently tap someone on the shoulder. Not to scold them, not to insult them, just to ask a calm question like, "Are you sure?" Or perhaps, have you tested this in a way that matches real life? Or maybe, have you considered that cameras are not impressed by citrus? For McArthur Wheeler, that moment took place not in a secret warehouse or a high-tech hideout, but in an ordinary setting where many bad ideas are born. A kitchen, a bathroom, a place with a sink, a place where lemon juice can be found without raising suspicion, because buying lemon juice is normal. The world does not track it. The world does not care. The world assumes you are going to make salad dressing. This is, sadly, part of what made the plan feel safe. The concept in his mind was simple. If lemon juice can be invisible on paper, then perhaps lemon juice can be invisible on skin. If the writing cannot be seen, then perhaps the face cannot be seen. He treated visibility like it was a toggle switch. On, off, lemon, no lemon. He did not treat visibility like a process involving light, lenses, angles, and the fact that cameras are literally designed to capture what light bounces off surfaces. He did not treat skin like paper. He treated the world like it would follow the rules of his story. This is where Clifton Earl Johnson enters again, at least as an influence. In many accounts, Johnson spoke about the lemon juice plan, and the idea seems to have been shared, believed, and reinforced between them. That is how weak ideas become strong. Two people say them out loud, and the sound of the words gives them weight. The idea becomes less of a thought and more of a plan. It becomes social. It becomes a group project. And group projects can be dangerous when the assignment is nonsense. McArthur Wheeler did what he believed was responsible preparation. He tested the lemon juice. Testing is generally good. Testing is how we learn. Testing is how we avoid embarrassment. The issue here is that testing can also create false confidence if the test does not match reality. Imagine the scene. A man stands near a mirror or perhaps near a camera, applying lemon juice like it is a scientific instrument. The smell alone should have been a clue. Invisibility rarely smells like a fruit stand. But he continued. He applied enough to feel like he had done the job. He may have felt clever. He may have felt protected. He may have felt like a person who found a shortcut through the laws of physics. There is an anecdote often told about a Polaroid photo. The idea is that he took a photo of himself after applying lemon juice, and the image did not come out the way he expected, leading him to believe he was not visible. The details of that moment have been repeated in different ways over time, but the basic shape remains the same. He believed the test proved the theory. And here we arrive at the quiet villain of the chapter. Not a person, not a weapon, not a bank. The quiet villain is confirmation bias. That gentle mental habit that looks at evidence and asks, does this support what I already believe? If the evidence supports it, the mind nods. If the evidence does not, the mind finds a way to blame the evidence. If a photo came out too bright, too washed out, or too unclear, a person might reasonably say, this photo is not good. Let us try again. Let us adjust the lighting. Let us stand still. Let us clean the lens. But a person who already wants to believe in invisibility might say, yes, this proves it. The camera could not capture me. I am a ghost. I am a lemon-flavored phantom. Science has done my bidding. The irony is that cameras do not fail because someone uses lemon juice. Cameras fail because of exposure, focus, distance, movement, or 1,000 other practical reasons. A bad photo does not mean invisibility. A bad photo means the photo is bad. But that distinction requires humility. It requires the ability to say, maybe I do not know. And humility was not invited to this kitchen. At this point, the plan could have been stopped by any one of several small interventions. A friend could have said, that sounds wrong. A moment of doubt could have said, let us check. A basic understand of how light works could have said, please do not do this. But the mind can be incredibly persuasive when it wants a shortcut. There is also the fact that the plan avoided a more important question. Even if lemon juice did something magical, which it does not, what about everything else? What about posture, voice, movement, clothing, and the simple truth that a person is more than a face? Banks are not recording facial features, they are recording a whole event, and events have patterns. But once a person believes in a single magic trick, they often stop thinking about the rest of the show. This chapter is not meant to be cruel. It is meant to be honest about how people can build castles out of tiny misunderstandings. We all do it in smaller ways. We trust a rumor. We trust a quick fix. We trust a tip that sounds clever. Most of the time, the cost is minor. The cost is wasted time. The cost is disappointment. In this case, the cost would be far louder. While McArthur Wheeler prepared, Pittsburgh continued its normal life. People drove across the Fort Pitt Bridge complaining about the merge. People stood in line at coffee shops pretending they were not tired. People went into banks to deposit paychecks and ask for a roll of quarters. They did not know they were about to share air with a man who smelled faintly like citrus and certainty. In the soft tension of a bedtime true crime story, this is where the narrator takes a calm breath and says, "Nothing good comes from a plan that requires you to pretend cameras are confused by fruit. If your disguise strategy could be defeated by a paper towel and common sense, it is not a strategy, it is performance art." And yet, the plan continued, not because it was strong, but because the belief was strong. McArthur Wheeler did not think he was walking toward consequences. He thought he was walking toward success. He thought he had built a shield. He thought he had outsmarted a system that had been refining itself for years. Soon, that belief would step into a bank lobby, under bright lights, in front of the world's least romantic audience. Chapter 3: The First Bank Swissvale branch of Mellon Bank. Swissvale sits east of Pittsburgh in a way that feels close enough to be part of the city story, beat enough to have its own daily rhythm. It is the kind of place where people recognize intersections the way they recognize faces, a neighborhood where routines matter. On an ordinary day, a bank branch there would be a small center of gravity. No glamorous, no dramatic, just useful. The Swissvale branch of Mellon Bank was not a stage built for chaos. It was built for transactions. People entered to do simple things: deposit, withdraw, ask question, solve small problems with polite forms and quiet voices. The counters were solid and the floors were clean in that way banks try to maintain, like cleanliness is a promise. McArthur Wheeler approached this bank with the confidence of a man who believed he had solved the only puzzle that mattered. To him, the biggest threat was being seen, and he believed he had arranged not to be seen. He had applied lemon juice and trusted it like armor. He was, in his own mind, prepared. From the outside, there was nothing magical about the moment. A man walked toward a building. The door opened. Air conditioning met the warmth of the street. The small sounds of banking life continued. A teller moved papers. A customer shifted their weight in line. Someone coughed quietly. In the ceiling corners, the cameras watched without emotion. He entered. The bright lights did what bright lights do. They illuminated. They did not dim out of politeness. They did not soften to match his imagination. They shone directly onto him, onto the lobby, onto every detail that the camera could capture. Here is where the calm narrator must be careful. We are telling a true crime story for sleep. That means we avoid graphic detail, we avoid harsh words, we keep it humane. The core fact is that the bank was confronted. People were placed under stress. The situation was unsafe. It mattered. It affected real employees and customers who did not ask to be part of anyone's plan. But we can describe it without making it sharp. We can say it plainly. McArthur Wheeler attempted to take money from the bank by intimidation. He tried to make the staff comply. He relied on fear and urgency. That is the nature of these events. That is what makes them serious. Even when the plan is absurd, the impact on the people in the room is not a joke. In that lobby, time would have felt strange. For the employees, moments can stretch. A few seconds can feel like a long corridor. For customers, the brain flips into survival mode, tracking exits, faces, and tone. For the person causing the event, time can feel fast, like a film playing at a higher speed, because adrenaline does not care about pacing. McArthur Wheeler likely believed he was moving through the scene like a shadow. He likely believed his face was not being captured. He likely believed the cameras would look at the footage later and see nothing, or see a blur, or see an empty space shaped like success. He did not understand that he was being recorded as clearly as any person could be recorded, because lemon juice does not erase a person, it only makes them smell like a drink. Banks also have procedures, quiet procedures, training, buttons and phone calls and signals that staff can use when something goes wrong. This does not mean a bank is invincible. It means banks are not passive. People in banks are trained to remain calm, to follow policies that reduce harm, and to trigger help when safe to do so. The staff in Swissvale would have been doing their best under stress. They would have been trying to keep things from escalating. They would have been trying to survive the moment and protect others. The event ended, as these events often do, with the person leaving. The exit is sometimes the most dangerous feeling part for everyone left behind, because the brain does not know whether it is truly over. When the door closes, the silence can be loud. People look at each other with wide eyes. Someone might cry. Someone might go very still. Someone might suddenly realize their hands are shaking. Outside, McArthur Wheeler moved away from the bank with something he wanted, and with a belief that his plan had worked. This is another strange feature of human error. The first success, or what feels like success, can harden the belief. If he got out of the building, if no one stopped him immediately, then to his mind that meant the lemon juice worked. He would not interpret it as luck or delay. He would interpret it as proof. He might have felt triumphant. He might have felt like a clever person in a clever story. He might have felt like a man who had finally found a way to beat a system that often feels unbeatable. He might have imagined himself invisible, slipping through the city like a secret. In reality, the system was already responding. Cameras had recorded him. Employees and witnesses would describe what they saw. The bank would report the event. Law enforcement would begin the methodical work of collecting facts. The wheels of that process are not flashy. They are steady. They turn with paperwork and patience, not with dramatic music. The most quietly funny part, in a tragic kind of way, is that the cameras did not have to work hard. They did not need enhancement. They did not need special filters. They were simply doing what they were built to do, capturing the face of a man who believed his face was hidden. In the footage, the lemon juice did not create invisibility. It created a sheen. It may have made the skin reflect light differently. It may have made him look slightly sweaty or odd, but it did not erase him. If anything, it helped him stand out. After leaving the Swissvale branch, the choice in front of him was the choice that often follows a first wrongdoing. Stop now or continue. The safest decision for everyone would have been to stop, to go home, to sit down, to realize that the risk was enormous and the moral cost was real. But belief does not always lead to stopping. Sometimes belief leads to escalation. McArthur Wheeler, according to reports, did not stop after the first bank. He continued the same day. That detail matters because it shows how fully he trusted his own misunderstanding. One bank could have been a fluke. 2 banks begins to look like a plan. It begins to look like he was not improvising. He was repeating. He was following a script he believed would protect him. In the aftermath inside the Swissvale branch, people would have tried to recover. Staff would have completed reports. Managers would have made calls. Some employees might have replayed the moment in their minds for days. That is a quiet part of true crime stories that often gets skipped. The event ends for the person who leaves, but it continues for the people who remain. And somewhere not far away in a different building, someone would soon watch the surveillance footage and feel a specific kind of disbelief. A disbelief that the event happened. Sadly, that happens. Disbelief at how clear the suspect looked. Disbelief at the idea that someone might have thought they were not visible. Disbelief that the world had delivered a case that was both serious and strangely ridiculous. This is the first bank, the first public step. The city does not know it yet, but a legend is being born. Not the kind of legend that is heroic. The kind that becomes a cautionary tale told with a sigh and a half smile. A story about what happens when confidence runs ahead of comprehension, dragging a bottle of lemon juice behind it like a tiny sticky flag. The day continued, the lights stayed bright, the cameras stayed on, and McArthur Wheeler, still believing in his citrus shield, move toward the next decision. Chapter 4. The second bank, Fidelity Savings Bank in Brighton Heights. Brighton Heights sits on the north side with the kind of quiet pride that does not need to advertise itself. It is a neighborhood where streets curve like they were drawn by someone who knew the hills personally. Houses stand close enough to share weather stories, and local routines feel older than whatever is on the news. Even if you do not live there, you can feel that the area has its own steady pulse, a habit of continuing. On a normal day, a bank branch in Brighton Heights would be part of that rhythm. People would step in to handle small practical tasks, a withdrawal before groceries, a deposit from a small business, a question about a statement that looked strange at 2 a.m. The building would be ordinary, which is a quiet form of protection. Ordinary places make people let their guard down. Ordinary places invite normal expectations. Fidelity Savings Bank, like most banks, was built to feel calm. It had counters that guided your body into polite lines. It had chairs that suggested you could sit if you needed to, as long as you did not sit forever. It had pen chains that implied 2 things at once. We trust you, but not that much. The lighting was bright and even because the bank wanted you to see everything clearly, including the idea that order lives here. McArthur Wheeler approached this second location with the kind of momentum that can be mistaken for competence. A first event can create a rush, a sense that the world has confirmed your story. He had entered one bank and left without being stopped in that moment. In his mind, that was not luck or delay, that was proof. His plan had worked. He had not been caught on the spot. Therefore, in his internal logic, he must have been invisible enough. This is the danger of interpreting timing as validation. The world does not always respond instantly. Police work is not a cartoon trap that springs the second someone does something wrong. It is a process. Reports get filed, calls get made, details get compared. If a person mistakes that process for failure, they can become braver in the worst direction. And so he went to a second bank on the same day. If you want a sign that someone believes their own story, this is it. The decision to repeat. The decision to scale up. The decision to take a serious risk and then immediately take another, as if the first did not count as a warning. He entered Fidelity Savings Bank with that same lemon-flavored certainty. The lemon juice, if he used it again, would have been doing what it always does, sitting on the skin, reflecting light, smelling sharp, not performing miracles. The cameras, meanwhile, were doing what they always do, watching patiently, recording faithfully, holding on to details like a quiet librarian who never forgets where you put the book. Inside the bank, people were doing regular human things. A teller might have been balancing a drawer. A customer might have been counting cash with that slow, careful motion that says, "I do not want to look nervous, but I also do not want to be wrong." Someone might have been filling out a slip, leaning on the counter with their shoulders slightly tense. People in banks often carry invisible stress. Bills, rent, time pressure, but it is normal stress. It belongs to everyday life. Then the atmosphere changed. When something unsafe happens in a public place, the shift can be almost physical. The air gets heavier, conversations stop. People become very aware of where their bodies are, where the doors are, and what the tone in the room means. For staff, training can kick in. For customers, instinct can take over. For everyone, the mind tries to understand what is happening, while also trying not to make it worse. McArthur Wheeler again attempted to take money by intimidation. Again, the situation placed employees and customers under stress. Again, the seriousness of that impact is real, even if the plan behind it is ridiculous. This is where the story holds 2 truths at once. The event is dangerous and not funny for the people living it, and the logic behind it is astonishing in a way that makes the broader public later shake their heads. The bank staff likely did what many are trained to do in these moments. Keep calm. Do not escalate. Follow procedures designed to reduce harm. The goal is survival, not heroics. In reality, most people who experience something like that do not want a dramatic confrontation. They want the moment to end. They want everyone to leave in one piece. They want to go home and sit down and stare at a wall for a while. The cameras captured the event from multiple angles. Note artistic angles, functional angles, the doorway angle, the counter angle, the corner angle, the angle that sees your face when you think no one is looking. The bank did not need the suspect to cooperate. The suspect was cooperating automatically by existing in front of a lens. If McArthur Wheeler had any fleeting doubt, it would have had to fight through adrenaline. Adrenaline is loud. It convinces you that your plan is working because it feels like action. It can cover up the quieter voice that says, "This is not how invisibility works." It can drown out caution with the sound of your own heartbeat. After he left Fidelity Savings Bank, the pattern repeated. A quick exit, a belief in success, a sense that the city was not catching him. He may have felt untouchable. He may have felt like the world was finally paying him back. He may have felt like the cleverest person in Pittsburgh for about 15 minutes. But while he moved on, the city began to collect him. Inside the bank, after the door closed, the room would have filled with the sounds of recovery. Someone might have exhaled sharply. Someone might have asked if everyone was okay. Someone might have reached for a phone. There is often a strange mix of calm and shaking after a stressful event. People can look composed and still feel like their skin is humming. Managers would have made calls. Staff would have described what they saw. Witnesses would have tried to remember details. Clothing, height, voice, the way he moved. In moments like that, the brain records some things sharply and misses others entirely. But with cameras, memory does not have to do all the work. Law enforcement would soon have not just one set of footage, but more. Not just one set of witness statements, but more. Not just one event to analyze, but a pattern. Patterns are important. Patterns narrow the search. Patterns create timelines. Patterns turn chaos into a case file. If you look at this moment from a distance, you can see the tragedy of it. A man believed in a misunderstanding and used that misunderstanding to justify harm. He created fear for strangers. He disrupted lives. He put himself on a path that would end badly. And he did it while believing he was protected by something you can buy at a grocery store. This chapter ends with the city now holding multiple pieces of evidence, and McArthur Wheeler still holding his lemon juice belief. The distance between those two realities is about to collapse. Chapter 5. The cameras do their boring job. If there is a hero in this story, it is not a person with a dramatic speech. It is not a chase scene. It is not a clever trap. It is something much less exciting and much more effective. It is the boring job of recording, the unglamorous work of keeping track, the steady truth that machines do not get confused by confidence. Surveillance footage is not cinematic. It is often grainy, flat, and a little awkward. The angles are unflattering, the lighting can be harsh, the movement can be jittery, but it has one key quality that matters more than style. It shows what happened, it shows who was there, it shows how they moved, it shows the face a person brought into the room. In Pittsburgh in 1995, banks already relied on cameras as part of their safety systems. The equipment was not modern high definition like people are used to now, but it did not need to be perfect. It needed to capture enough to identify, enough to compare, enough to say this person was here at this time at this place. After the events, investigators would gather the recordings and begin the slow process of turning video into leads. This is where true crime stories often become less dramatic and more procedural. Someone logs the tapes, someone labels them carefully, someone watches the footage again and again, pausing, rewinding, writing notes, someone makes copies, someone files paperwork, someone calls a supervisor, someone looks for patterns. A bank event is not just a single incident. It is a set of data points, time of day, location, method, words used, behavior, direction of travel. If there are multiple bank events, those data points can be compared. If the same person appears, the footage can be placed side by side. If the same face appears, the face becomes the center of the case. This is where McArthur Wheeler's plan failed in a way that was not subtle. He was visible, not slightly visible, Not maybe visible. He was simply visible as anyone walking into a bank. The lemon juice did not hide him, it did not blur him, it did not erase him, it did not trick the lens, it just sat there. If anything, it may have made his face look stranger on camera, not because it removed him, but because it changed how his skin reflected light. Cameras love reflected light. Brightness draws attention. A glossy face under bank lighting can make features stand out. It can emphasize shapes. It can create a shine that says, "Notice me," the opposite of invisibility. Investigator would also talk to witnesses. Witness statements can be messy, but they matter. People remember fragments. The sound of a voice, a certain phrase, the color of clothing, the shape of a hat, the way someone held their hands, the direction they ran. Even if memory is imperfect, a group of imperfect memories can still form a useful picture, especially when paired with video. As the picture formed, law enforcement would do what they often do in cases like that. They would look for connections. Who might know this person? Who might recognize this face? Who might have heard someone bragging, complaining, or explaining their new plan? They would check records. They would follow leads. They would interview people. At some point, the investigation connected to Clifton Earl Johnson. In many accounts, Johnson was identified and then questioned. Cases involving multiple people can crack when one person decides to talk. Not always out of kindness, sometimes out of self-interest, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of the simple realization that the evidence is strong and denial will not change it. When investigators have a name, a case becomes more solid. A face becomes a person. A person has an address, a routine, a history, connections. A person can be found. A person can be located at home, at work, at a friend's house, at a corner store. The world becomes smaller for them, but the story does not snap shut instantly. There is often a gap between the event and the arrest. That gap is not empty. It is filled with steps. Confirm identity. Gather enough evidence for an arrest. Coordinate teams. Choose timing. Make sure procedures are followed. In the gap, the suspect may feel safe. They may think the world forgot. They may think the plan worked. McArthur Wheeler did not appear to behave like someone who feared being identified. That detail is part of why the story is remembered. He seemed sincerely convinced that he had been invisible. When people later heard the explanation, it landed not like a clever excuse, but like a genuine misunderstanding spoken with confidence. This is also where the story becomes a lesson about the difference between knowing a fact and understand it. Knowing that lemon juice can be used as invisible ink is a fact. Understanding what that means and where it applies is comprehension. Without comprehension, facts become props. They become decorations for whatever story a person wants to tell themselves. The cameras, however, do not care about comprehension. They do not care about stories. They do not care about what you believe. They care about lant. They care about movement. They care about what is in the frame. They are indifferent, and that indifference is powerful. Investigators also know that public help can be useful. When you have footage and a face, you can sometimes get faster results by showing it to the community. Someone out there will recognize the person. Someone will say, "I know him." Someone will call. That is not always comfortable to think about, but it is real. Communities notice, people talk. And in cases where a person is not a professional at hiding, recognition can spread quickly. The next big step in this story involves that public angle. But even before it happens, this chapter holds a quiet truth. McArthur Wheeler's fate was not decided by a brilliant trick. It was decided by ordinary systems working as intended. Cameras record. People reported. Investigators compared notes. The case tightened like a net that does not rush, but does not stop. While all of this was happening, McArthur Wheeler likely continued living as if he had gotten away with it. That is the strange calm in the middle of a storm. A person can wake up, eat breakfast, and feel safe, while evidence sits in an office waiting for the next step. The world can look normal right up until the moment it does not. And so the cameras kept doing their boring job, and the case kept building quietly, and the lemon juice theory kept floating in one man's head like a balloon that had never been tested outdoors. Chapter 6. the gap between January and April. Time in true crime stories often behaves like weather. It changes quickly for the people inside the event and slowly for everyone else. The day of the bank events is sharp and immediate. Then the story stretches into weeks, and the sharpness becomes a waiting game. In this case, there was a period between the events and the final public turning point that many people later remembered. A gap where investigators were working, and McArthur Wheeler was not yet in custody. A gap where evidence existed, but consequences had not yet arrived at his door. For investigators, the gap is filled with routine work that is not glamorous. They gather reports from each bank. They check times and compare details. They line up witness statements with video footage. They create a timeline. They look for a vehicle description. They look for patterns in behavior. They examine whether the same person appears in multiple recordings. They consider whether there are more events to connect. They also deal with constraints. Not every case gets unlimited resources. Not every investigator has time to focus on a single incident. There are other calls, other emergencies, other paperwork. And yet, patterns like multiple bank events are serious. They rise in priority, they demand attention, they bring coordination between departments and agencies. During this time, people in the banks were also living with the aftermath. Employees might have returned to work the next day and felt their stomach tighten when someone walked in wearing a hat. Customers might have avoided that branch for a while. A teller might have replayed the scene in their mind during quiet moments, then forced themselves to focus on counting bills. Stress does not always end when the event ends. It can linger, quietly, like a song stuck in your head that you did not choose. Meanwhile, McArthur Wheeler was likely living in a different reality. He had done something serious and illegal, yet he seems to have believed he had escaped identification. He may have felt some nervousness, but it would have been mixed with confidence. That mix can be especially dangerous. Nervous enough to keep you alert, confident enough to keep you careless. If he truly believed the lemon juice made him invisible to cameras, then his expectations would have been strange. He might have expected the police to have no suspect at all. He might have expected the news to describe a person that no one could see. He might have expected confusion, not clarity. This is where the psychology of the story becomes almost gentle in its absurdity. Many people lie to protect themselves. They invent excuses. They pretend not to know. But in this case, the famous explanation sounded sincere, like a person genuinely surprised to learn that the world does not run on their private rules. There is also a lesson here about the way some people use a single success to justify a whole belief system. If McArthur Wheeler left the first bank without being stopped, and then left the second without being stopped, he could interpret that as evidence that his invisibility method worked. He could ignore the more obvious explanation, which is that police do not teleport into place instantly. While he went about his days, investigators were moving closer. They had footage, they had a face. They were likely identifying connections. If Clifton Earl Johnson was questioned and provided information, that would have strengthened the path to Wheeler. Cooperation from an associate can turn a slow investigation into a direct route. But even with good leads, law enforcement often prefers to be thorough. They do not want a case built on a hunch. They want documentation. They want a clear chain of evidence. They want to minimize mistakes. That takes time. It requires signatures, approvals, planning. During this gap, another important force was also building: public attention. In many cases, local news plays a role. Crime segments, safety bulletins, community alerts. These broadcasts can be simple, almost routine: a face on the screen, a request for tips, a phone number. The tone is often calm, because the goal is not to panic the public, but to encourage information. For a suspect who believes they were invisible, seeing their own face on television would be like watching the laws of physics break. It would be like the universe saying, "No, we did not agree to your terms." But before that moment, the suspect can live in a bubble. The bubble is made of ordinary days, grocery trips, conversations, maybe even jokes. The bubble is not comfortable, but it is not yet shattered. It is a kind of false normal. Pittsburgh itself continued doing what cities do. It kept moving. People went to Penguins games. People argued about sports. People drove across bridges and forgot to appreciate them. Winter moved towards spring, the sky shifting from grey to slightly less grey. The city did not pause for one man's misunderstanding, and yet, under that normal life, the case kept tightening. A file got thicker, a detective made another call, a tip line number got prepared, a tape got queued up for broadcast. The distance between the suspect and the moment of recognition became smaller. This chapter is the calm hallway between two loud doors. On one side, the bank events. On the other side, the public broadcast that would turn the case into a cultural moment. In the hallway, everyone is walking toward the same meeting point, whether they know it or not. McArthur Wheeler was walking too, carrying the strange confidence of someone who believes he has discovered a loophole, unaware that the loophole is just a misunderstanding with a citrus scent. Soon the television would glow in living rooms across the area, and the audience would do what audiences do best: recognize, call, connect the dots. Chapter 7. The Crime Stoppers Broadcast. Late-night television has a special kind of calm. The day has finished yelling, the phone has stopped ringing, and the world has agreed to speak more softly. Even the commercials seem a little tired. For many people, late-night news is background sound, something to keep the room from feeling too empty. For others, it is a habit, a final check that the world is still mostly intact before sleep. In the Pittsburgh area, crime segments were often delivered in that practical tone that says, "This happened, here is what we know, please help if you can." The format is familiar: a short introduction, a few facts, a face if there is one, a request for tips, a number to call. The camera on the news anchor stays steady, and the anchor stays professional, because panic is not helpful and theatrics do not solve cases. This night, the segment involved bank events, and a suspect whose face was very much available. The footage had been collected, reviewed, and prepared. Investigators knew the value of showing a clear image to the public. When you have a face and you have a community, you have a wide net. Someone will recognize the person. Someone will connect the dots. Someone will call and say, "I know him, I worked with him, I saw him, I cannot believe it, but yes, that is him." The segment aired, and the room lights in homes across the area reflected softly off screens. Some viewers paid close attention. Some viewers looked up halfway through. Some viewers only caught the last part. But it did not take long for the story to find the right eyes, because the image was not subtle. It was not a shadowy figure. It was not a mystery silhouette. It was a clear human face, caught by cameras doing their quiet work. There is something both ordinary and powerful about community recognition. People are surprisingly good at faces. A neighbor recognizes a neighbor. A co-worker recognizes a co-worker. A family member recognizes a family member. Even if they do not want to, even if they wish they could pretend they do not, the brain does its job. That is him. That looks like him. That is too much like him to ignore. When those tips begin to arrive, they often arrive with the same emotional pattern. Surprise first, then certainty, then a small wave of disbelief that turns into a decision. Should I call? Should I get involved? Should I leave it alone? Many people do not want to step into a serious situation, but some do. Some feel responsible. Some feel protective of their community. Some simply do not like the idea that someone can create fear and then wander around as if nothing happened. So the calls came in. Tips, names, locations, bits of information that turned a face on a screen into a person in the real world. The investigators would take those calls seriously, but also carefully. Not every tip is correct. Not every caller is reliable. Some people want attention. Some people are confused. Some people genuinely mean well but misremember. That is why investigators cross-check. They compare. They verify. They look for the tip that matches the evidence. In this case, the tip that mattered most would be the one that pointed directly to McArthur Wheeler. If you imagine the moment from his perspective, it is almost surreal. A man who believes he has been invisible is living in a world where he expects not to be recognized. He expects that cameras failed. He expects that the story will be vague. He expects that people will be searching for a blur. And then, in the same world, other people are watching television and seeing him clearly. This is the gap between private belief and public reality. It is a gap that can exist for a long time, until it collapses in nigh instant. The Crime Stoppers format also encourages speed. It is designed to move cases forward. The sooner the public sees a face, the sooner the public can respond, and the public response can arrive fast, because recognition does not require research. Recognition is immediate. It is the human version of a search function. Law enforcement would begin to plan the next step. Once a suspect is identified and location information is credible, the approach has to be careful. Procedures matter. Safety matters. Timing matters. They do not want chaos. They do not want anyone hurt. They want the situation controlled, calm, and professional. That planning phase is also where the story gains soft tension. Because the suspect might still be in his own bubble. He might still believe he is untouchable. He might still be making tea, watching television, or simply going to bed thinking the day was ordinary. And then the bubble meets the knock. The scene of an arrest is often quieter than people expect. It is not always a dramatic crash through a door. It can be a few vehicles arriving, lights kept low, voices controlled. Officers approach with focus, not anger. They follow steps, they announce themselves, they give instruction. They aim to reduce the chance of a sudden reaction. Somewhere in Pittsburgh, on that night after the broadcast, officers headed toward the place where McArthur Wheeler could be found. The distance between him and consequences became a few streets, then a few minutes, then a few steps on a sidewalk. The most famous line in this story is still waiting ahead, but the stage for it was built right here. A broadcast, a face on a screen, a community that recognized it, and a man who believed his lemon juice plan had made him vanish. The television glow faded in living rooms as people went to sleep, but for one man, sleep would not arrive the way he expected. Chapter 8. The Arrest and the Famous Line. The moment reality arrives at your door can feel unfair, even when you invited it with your own choices. That is the strange way the mind works. It can treat consequences like an ambush, even when consequences have been sending polite letters for weeks. In the late hours after the Crime Stoppers broadcast, law enforcement approached McArthur Wheeler. The approach was likely deliberate and controlled. This is not the part of the story where people yell for entertainment. This is the part where procedure takes over, because procedure prevents mistakes and keeps people safer. An arrest can be quiet, a knock, a voice identifying who is outside, instructions given clearly, a door opening, a human face in the frame of a doorway trying to understand what is happening. Some arrests happen in public, but many happen at home, where the shock feels sharper because home is where people expect to be left alone. McArthur Wheeler, according to reporting, did not respond like a person who thought he had been visible on camera. He responded like a person who truly believed he had not been visible at all. His confusion was not staged. It was not a clever performance. It was the confusion of someone whose internal rules had just been rejected by the universe. This is where the story produces its line, the one that becomes the headline and the punchline and the lesson all at once. "But I wore the lemon juice." He reportedly said something like that when confronted with the idea that he had been identified. The exact phrasing can be repeated differently in different retellings, but the meaning stays steady. He believed the lemon juice should have prevented cameras from capturing him, and he was genuinely surprised that it did not. That surprise is the most fascinating part of the case, and also the saddest, because it reveals how deeply a person can misunderstand a basic concept and still trust it with full confidence. It is not just that he made a mistake, it is that he made a mistake and treated it like a law of nature. In that moment, officers and investigators would have faced a strange challenge, not the usual challenge of denial, but the challenge of sincere disbelief. A suspect insisting that a method should have worked, as if the method was proven science and the world had malfunctioned. There is a calm sarcasm available here, but we keep it gentle. This is a human being, not a cartoon. And yet, the scenario is undeniably absurd. A grown man, involved in serious wrongdoing, looking at his capture like it was a technical error, as if the police had not caught him but had simply misunderstood his invisibility settings. If you imagine the conversation, it has the shape of two different realities speaking past each other. Investigators are discussing evidence, footage, witnesses, and the public broadcast. Wheeler is discussing lemon juice. It is like Ken person talking about gravity and another person insisting they are wearing a feather. The arrest process would continue, identification confirmed, evidence discussed, statements taken, rights read, transportation arranged. The system does not stop to debate citrus. The system moves forward because the system is built to move forward. This is also a moment where the story becomes a mirror. Many people have had smaller versions of this experience, a time when they believed something strongly and then reality disagreed loudly. The difference is that most people have that experience with harmless things, like a recipe or a home repair. In this story, the belief was tied to harm and crime, which makes the crash more serious. After the arrest, the case would proceed into the next phase, where facts become documents and events become charges. But the public memory tends to linger on this one moment because it captures something universal: overconfidence, misunderstanding, and the shock of being wrong. It also became a cultural reference point for a reason. The line is simple. It is almost childlike in its logic. It suggests a world where one small trick solves a complex problem. Many people want that kind of world. Many people want a shortcut. Many people want a single clever move that makes consequences disappear. But the world does not work that way. Cameras do not forget because you want them to. Physics does not negotiate. And lemon juice, for all its talents, is not a cloak. In the hours after the arrest, the story would begin to spread. News outlets would report it. People would tell friends. The phrase would travel. The laughter that followed would not erase the seriousness of what happened, but it would shape the way the public remembered it. The case became a cautionary tale wrapped in a strange comedic shell. And still, behind the humour, there were real employees and customers who had experienced fear. There were real investigators who did real work. There was a real legal process ahead. The joke did not cancel the harm, it simply coexisted with it, like two weather systems overlapping in the same sky. The arrest closed a chapter of action and opened the next chapter of consequences. Chapter 9. Courtroom Reality and Consequences. When a case moves into the legal system, the story becomes slower, heavier, and more structured. The chaos of the event gives way to the calm machinery of paperwork, hearings, and rules. This is where the world says, we are going to talk about this carefully, in the open, with records. Courtrooms are designed to be serious. The rooms are not built for comfort, they are built for clarity. Who did what, when, where, under what laws, what evidence supports the claims, what the defense says, what the prosecution says. A courtroom is a place where stories have to prove themselves. For McArthur Wheeler, the legal process would have turned his private belief into a footnote. The lemon juice theory might be mentioned, but it would not be treated as a meaningful defense. The facts would matter more. The footage, the witness statements, the timeline, the identification, the connections. This is also where the story tends to become more humane, in a quiet way, because legal proceedings deal in reality, not in spectacle. The courtroom is not interested in internet jokes, and it is not interested in humiliation. It is interested in accountability, procedure, and outcomes. Witnesses may have been called. Bank employees might have described what they experienced. Investigators might have described how the evidence was collected. The footage might have been reviewed. Each detail placed on the record like a stone in a line, building a path from the events to the verdict. In cases like that, there can also be cooperation agreements, statements from associates, and decisions made behind the scenes. People involved may choose to cooperate to reduce their own consequences. That is part of how the system works, for better or worse. It can help the court establish truth, and it can also create complicated questions about responsibility. For the people who were in the banks, the legal process can bring mixed feelings. On one hand, it can provide closure. On the other hand, it can force them to revisit a stressful moment. Being asked to testify can make the body remember what the mind would rather forget. Even in calm settings, those memories can return with sharp edges. The outcomes in court, including sentencing, are part of the historical record of the case. Different reports summarize them with varying detail. What matters for this bedtime telling is the shape of the result. The system treated the events as serious crimes, the consequences were real. The story did not end with a laugh, it ended with accountability. McArthur Wheeler became well known not because his actions were clever, but because his misunderstanding was so clear. That misunderstanding later caught the attention of psychologists and researchers who study how people perceive their own abilities. The case is frequently connected to the idea that some people can be highly confident while also being deeply mistaken, and that this confidence can make them less likely to question themselves. This connection does not excuse wrongdoing, it explains a pattern. It explains how a person can walk forward without checking the ground. It explains how a person can interpret a failed experiment as success. It explains how a person can treat a half-understood fact like a universal key. In the courtroom, however, explanations are not the same as excuses. The court can consider context, but it still has to address harm. It still has to address risk. It still has to address the message sent to the community that these events are not tolerated. For Wheeler, the courtroom phase would also have been the final collapse of his private world. No matter what he believed about lemon juice, the legal record would reflect what happened in the real world. The cameras did capture him, witnesses did see him, the public did recognize him, the case did move forward. This is where the calm sarcasm turns into a quiet lesson without preaching. If you are building a plan around a trick you have not truly tested, you are not building a plan. You are building a wish, and wishes do not hold up in court. The story also carries a softer lesson for anyone listening at bedtime. Confidence is not always proof. Feeling certain is not the same as being correct. And when the stakes involve other people, it is worth pausing to ask, what if I am wrong? The legal process concluded, and the case settled into history. But the tale remained alive in public memory because it was so strangely human. Serious wrongdoing wrapped in a misunderstanding, so simple it could fit on a grocery list. Lemon juice, cameras, surprise. In the next chapter, the story moves beyond the courtroom into the way it spread, the way it became a reference point, and the way it still gets told when people talk about overconfidence and bad plans. Chapter 10. The Afterlife of a Bizarre Idea. Some stories end when the legal process ends. The file closes, the paperwork is stored, and the people involved move on as best they can. But a few stories do not stay inside their folders. They drift out into the wider world, carried by the strange wind of human curiosity. They become examples. They become warnings. They become that tale someone brings up when the conversation turns to bad decisions and misplaced confidence. The McArthur Wheeler incident did not remain only a Pittsburgh story. It escaped, it traveled, it became a shorthand for a very specific kind of mistake. The mistake where someone believes a little fact and then stretches it until it snaps. The mistake where someone confuses a trick with a law. The mistake where someone is so certain they are clever that they stop checking whether they are correct. Part of the reason the story traveled is that it has a clear image in the mind. A man walking into a bank believing he is unseen because he used lemon juice. Even if you do not know the details, you can picture the core. It is almost like a fable, the kind of tale that would end with a line like, "And so he learned that fruit is not a disguise." Except in real life, the cost was not its embarrassment. The cost included fear for bank employees and customers, and serious legal consequences for the person who caused it. In the years after the incident, journalists and writers retold it. People told it to friends. It appeared in discussions about human behavior and mistakes. It became one of those stories that gets repeated because it feels too odd to be true, and that reaction makes it even more memorable when you learn it is true. The most famous part of the story, the lemon juice line, helped it survive. A single simple sentence can act like a handle you can carry a whole story by. But I wore the lemon juice. It is a sentence that captures a worldview where a person expects the universe to cooperate with their plan. And then there is the way the story was used in psychology. Researchers and educators often refer to a pattern where people with low ability in a certain area may overestimate their competence, partly because they do not have enough knowledge to see their own mistakes. This pattern is popularly associated with the Dunning and Kruger effect, and the Wheeler case has been cited as a vivid example in many discussions. It is important to speak about that connection carefully. The label is not a punchline. It is a way to describe a human tendency that can appear in all kinds of settings. It can show up when someone thinks they are an expert in a topic they barely know. It can show up when someone refuses to learn because they already feel sure. It can show up in small, harmless moments, like giving confident advice about cooking when you have never cooked. It can also show up in bigger moments, when confidence fuels risky and harmful actions. In McArthur Wheeler's case, the tendency was visible because the misunderstanding was so concrete. Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, that is true. But it does not make you invisible on camera. That is not how cameras work. The leap between those two ideas reveals how a person can take a fact and build a fantasy with it. Another reason the story lasted is that it sits on the edge between comedy and discomfort. People laugh because the idea is absurd. People also feel uneasy because real people were impacted. That tension is part of what makes it stick. It is not a purely funny tale. It is not a purely tragic tale. It is both, and that combination creates a strange kind of gravity. If you are listening at bedtime, you might notice how the calm telling changes the mood. Without loud music and sharp words, the story becomes less like a spectacle and more like a quiet case study. A reminder that human beings can do remarkable things, and also can do remarkably misguided things, sometimes in the same hour. There is also the community side of the story. The case moved forward not just because cameras recorded, but because people recognized and reported. That is a kind of ordinary civic action. A person sees something on the news, connects it to someone they know, and makes a call. That call can change the direction of a case. It can close the distance between a suspect and accountability. It can also remind us that communities are not just crowds. They are networks. They remember faces. They share information. They help each other, even when it feels awkward. But even in that community action, it is worth keeping a humane tone. The goal is not humiliation. The goal is safety. When someone causes fear in public places, the community response is a way of restoring stability, not with drama, but with cooperation. The afterlife of the story also reveals something about storytelling itself. People prefer stories with clear symbols. In this week, lemon juice becomes the symbol. Not money, at the bank, not the legal system. Lemon juice. A kitchen ingredient turned into a failed disguise. A symbol of how a simple misunderstanding can grow into a serious mess. And if we step back even further, the story becomes a small lesson in self-awareness. If you're about to do something important, or risky, or harmful, it is worth checking your assumptions. It is worth asking, what do I actually know, and what am I guessing? It is worth seeking feedback from someone who will tell you the truth. It is worth testing your idea in a way that matches real conditions, not in a way that gives you the answer you want. Of course, that is advice for everyday life, not a map for wrongdoing. But the core still holds. The world is not easily tricked by confidence. Reality does not bend because you believe it should. In the quiet end of a bedtime true crime story, we do not need to shout the moral. We can simply set it on the table like a glass of water and let it be there. A man tried to hide from cameras with lemon juice. Cameras did what cameras do. The public recognized him. The system responded. The case became a cautionary tale told with a half smile and a sigh. Now the night can settle back into calm. The bridges of Pittsburgh are still there in the imagination, steady over dark water. The bank lobbies are quiet again, bright and ordinary. The cameras keep watching, not as villains, not as heroes, just as tools. And the idea of lemon juice as invisibility returns to its proper place, which is in a recipe, not in a plan.